Okay, it's connecting now. Okay, you are all welcome to share the live stream to your personal Facebook profiles, if you'd like to do that now. Okay. Okay, good afternoon to our friends, family, wider community, our acquaintances, everyone we know. Good afternoon, and to those in our community of faith, a happy Sabbath to you. It's really a privilege for me this afternoon to introduce our panel for this afternoon's topic, Rediscovering Church Post-Covid-19, a conversation. Just before we get into our conversation here this afternoon, I would love to invite you where you are streaming from on Facebook or watching us from on Facebook to take a moment with us as we just reflect and have a moment of silence for those leaders, those elders, those people we've looked up to in our Seventh-day Adventist church communities who have unfortunately succumb and maybe lost their lives to COVID-19 and various perhaps other health circumstances during this difficult time we've all been facing. We've all been in some other way influenced. And so please, as I invite you, take this moment with me as I present this candle as just a beam of light to represent the influence upon our church communities, upon our lives, in terms of their wisdom and what they have imparted to us. It's now an opportunity for us to open up these important conversations and plow back into our churches to look forward to what has happened, but also to have a new hope in the return of our soon coming Savior. Please take this moment with me. Thank you so much. now that we have acknowledged and just taken a moment to remember those that have gone before, I'd once again like to welcome each of us to this really interesting topic. So our topic for this afternoon is Rediscovering Church Post-Covid-19, a conversation. And I have some really interesting, well-seasoned, maybe some new faces that you've not seen before on social platforms with me to really introduce and do an introduction of this topic to us, which is really looking at how being almost post-pandemic has affected our church and its communities. And so I'd just like to give each one on our panel this afternoon a moment just to introduce themselves, you know, their name, which church or area they are from, and what they do, if it is their choice to share this with us this afternoon. Professor Alti, can we start with you? Uncle Alti, just unmute.
Yeah, I'm so grateful to be part of this panel. I look forward to this. I am from the Belleville Seventh-day Adventist Church, and I'm the elder there, the senior elder. We have only 4 elders there for a big church, but it was a great experience and still is a great experience to serve in Belleville.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eleanor. I'm from the Silverleaf Church here in Somerset West, and I serve in the Children's Ministries Department with the early teens. And I'm so happy to be part of this conversation this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Grant Lottering, originally from George, but now working at the Ellen G. White Research Center in Somerset West, and I'm happy to be here as well.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sinigiwe, and I am from Lighthouse Estate Church in Durban-Umhlanga. And it's a very small church, a growing small church company, and I serve as the interest coordinator there. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and a happy Sabbath to all. I'm Eugene Carolus. I'm currently pastoring in the Northern Peninsula 1 district, and what a wonderful group of people to work with. I am extremely fortunate. It's my 2nd year working in this area, and I'm just so excited to be part of this platform. And thank you so much, Natasha, for the invitation.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am very proud to say that I am the youngest on this panel, and I am really honored to be here. Thank you so much, Natasha. My name is Brittany Joy Carolus. I attend Mount Calvary Seventh-day Adventist Church in Gauteng, Midrand, and I'm also very proud to represent them here today as well. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I hope you're all doing well. My name is Glenn Hurlow. I'm an elder at the Heidelberg College Seventh-day Adventist Church, and I've been serving there for over 20 years. Probably I've been serving at the church for longer than Brittany's been alive, but it's great to have diversity, and it's good to be with you this afternoon.
Hey, everybody. Good to see all of you, and good to be in the company of people that I really respect in the Adventist Church. My name is Lisa Marie Smith. I am the music director at Belleville Seventh-day Adventist Church, and other than that, I do what I love.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stafford Bomester, and I'm currently serving as one of the elders at the North Pine Seventh-day Adventist Church. I liked how you introduced us, Natasha, calling us seasoned members. I'm not sure what seasoning we have, but I'd like to celebrate with Brittany Joy Carolus today as she becomes even more seasoned on her birthday. Happy birthday, Brittany.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for those very original introductions. I know that Stafford shared with us in our conversation in the week. Sometimes it's a bit tricky to introduce yourself, but nevertheless, we've gotten through it. So just once again to welcome everyone that's viewing us on the Facebook live stream on the Girl Positive page. this afternoon we are just here to have an informal and really an introductory conversation to the topic, Rediscovering Church Post-Covid-19, a conversation. And so just to sort of set a context to our conversation this evening, or this afternoon, I would just like to say that I know that we have been exposed to sort of this online and virtual church through many platforms like we are using now, like Zoom, YouTube, Facebook. We have all been immersed in a variety of local, international, and even cross-culture spaces and content that has basically moved even across time zones. And so access to many groups and communities with differing levels of interactivity and sharing have made some really, I think, for all of us, interesting contributions to our spiritual growth, our thinking, and I think our expectations even of church as well. And so I know some of us, we've experienced nature hike Sabbaths, some of us youth group hopping, you know, visiting one group on Zoom here, the one week, another group on Zoom there, the other week, even service hopping, others Bible study groups, some morning outreach, others open air settings and meetings, and the list goes on. And so while many churches spend time, I think, in research and training, setting up their online presence and assigning budgets even for resources, others were even using SMS, and in other churches, even WhatsApp for the first time in attempting to stay connected to their church communities. And so for a brief moment, church doors opened and members were able to get back to the corporate in-church worship. But I think not long, and President Cyril came and then gave us the disappointing news again that we need to again move on to another level, and we found ourselves again behind locked doors. And now I think we're in a space where the online fatigue has sort of set in, and the motivation to even log in to services has dwindled. And so now my question to us and the panel, I think this afternoon really is, what will the post-COVID-19 church look like? What will it look like? Let's see if we can just add some ideas, some suppositions, presuppositions to the table, and then see also, I would love to invite you out there that is watching us on the live stream this afternoon to also contribute, give us your comments, your questions, and let's talk a little bit about this topic of the post-COVID-19 church. Uncle Alti, can you start us off? You just want to unmute, Uncle Alti?
This is the oldest member of this group, so we are challenged in more ways than one. But I'm saying that the experience of the last 18 months has really been, I would say, riveting in some sense of getting to grips with yourself, one's own personal relationship with your God. You know, the church has been there, and sometimes we think of that as a crutch. And now we are left to our own devices, our own ways of getting that spiritual nourishment that we used to get from church. The experience then for the Belleville Church especially, we only have 4 elders, and we use the opportunity to meet every week as an elders meeting. And that's a change that the COVID brought on us. And it taught us, gave us the opportunity to plan. So we, in that first period of not knowing where to go, we invited, or were actually challenged, and got the youth, the senior youth in our church, I would say the young adults, to come in and help us to establish the Zoom. They stepped forward and joined hands with our elders and planned with us. And then we moved to live stream broadcasting, which had its challenges to get every member involved. Yes, at a distance, it's very difficult to know. And the numbers showed that in attendance that dropped over the time. The structures also were faltering, you know, where we had regular board meetings, we couldn't have that. We could dial in, yes, also use the Zoom or the other platforms, but it wasn't so easy to get everyone on board from the perspective of their inputs. We had an hour or an hour and a half. It disciplined us in our meetings though. So we didn't elaborate so long for 3-hour board meetings. We only had the few that we had on Zoom. The community meetings, which normally go by the name of business meetings, also had to be restructured. And the children's Sabbath school was one of the areas of our church that suffered the most. And when we got back, our registration process had to be invented for attending. So that was tough. Observing protocols at church is always a challenge. Big occasions like weddings and funerals, people do not understand that you cannot have people or more than 50 attendees. So that was a big challenge, and you had to actually explain to people that, you know, it's in their own interest. Some having died with COVID or as a result of COVID made it very, very, very difficult. Luckily, other churches came to the fore who had also gone and structured a protocol for these meetings. But it is perhaps the biggest sacrifice that we had to make was the community services. The community service is a very special service in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And because of protocols that would not allow us to do that foot washing, it was one of the areas that really suffered. If I look at the future is uncertain. Are we speaking of a post-COVID? In other words, will there ever be a post-COVID? But we can actually talk about, say this were to hypothetically persist and stay as part of our everyday life, then, you know, we have to revisit the whole structure of our offices, I would imagine, because we found out that some of the offices became redundant or became more important. The technology portfolios in our church suddenly had a primary role to play. And we have to then look at ways to restructure the communion service. And I'd like to hear my colleagues on this panel saying to us, you know, what would communion be like? Revisit the structure given to the mission of the church, you know, special services for the youth, perhaps, children, and use the platform for big gatherings where we can really have thousands of people, where now we could not have it in the pre-COVID period. So I look forward to reinventing or re-visualizing the new post-COVID period of church and religion.
Thanks so much, Uncle Alti. Eleanor?
Thanks, Natasha. I think the past 18 months, not only for me, but I think for everyone, has felt like a roller coaster. And people have called it a corona coaster of ups and downs and various challenges. When it hit and we were faced with having to move on to the online space with church gatherings and worship, a thought that I had when I was growing up really stood out for me. I used to always wonder how and when and how long is it going to take for every corner of the earth to hear the gospel? How long is it going to take? It's definitely not going to happen in my generation or time. And in one fell swoop, COVID moved everything online. With the access of smartphones and digital technologies for those who are fortunate to have it, immediately people were sending sermons, people were able to log on at any time of the day, and it could really spread, and that caused me a sense of hope, despite all of the uncertainty, and I think the challenges that came with COVID. I'm one of the fortunate people, I think, who in this country has access, and at our church in Silverleaf, I always commend our tech people, because they're able to live stream and we are able to tune in. And I remember the excitement and the novelty of seeing people who we hadn't seen in weeks and then later months, because we couldn't meet in person, seeing them live and feeling that connection. But as Brother Alti mentioned, for me, the past 18 months has really been a continued practice of worshiping God in the absence of being able to gather together, particularly during the hard lockdown, and also in the times when I felt quite nervous to be in church gatherings. And it's really kind of brought into stark light what I need to do outside of just being able to gather with people and having that rhythm of Sabbath worship in actual church with people. And in many ways, it has helped my walk with Christ. And it's put that onus squarely again on my shoulders. I think one of the challenges that's come for me has been the sense of loss that has come with this disruption. I didn't realize how much I loved the ritual of church and how much I'd miss it once it wasn't there. And I think a lot of people are sitting with that, having to kind of deal with what that means. I missed spending lots of those, what people would think mundane moments during our church worship time. I really missed that. And I think feeling part of something. We are social beings and we are meant to be in fellowship with each other and in communion with each other. And once that's no longer possible or in the way that we were used to, it can cause some loss. So I think the future church is a church that takes cognizance of that creates structure and space where we can hold each other again, even if it isn't physically, but I think emotionally and spiritually. I think that the future church is a hybrid church. During this time, what it's taught me is, again, how absolutely adaptable we are as human beings. And I think that this is a God-given ability that we are able to ride waves of challenges and disruption as they come. And I think that it's something that we can tap into. I used to always wonder, or as a young person, I felt, the church is so slow in adapting and changing and moving with the times. And now I've seen how possible it is, even though there are challenges. So I think that the future church post-COVID is going to be a church that takes cognizance of all of this, that moves in a way that makes sense. I have absolute faith in that, especially having Christ at the center.
Now, a couple of years ago, we did this lesson study that was titled Churches That Make a Difference. And there was a question that really came through those lessons, which were asked repeatedly: if your church had to burn down or close its door for whatever reason, would the surrounding community miss your church? And what the lockdown has done is proved to us that the community does not really miss us when we are closed. And this thought really I must attribute to Pastor A.J. de Villiers, who said one of the reasons or one of the things that we need to focus on as a church is to make the church an essential service. The moment your church becomes an essential service, where the lockdown comes, the church will be, Pastor Eugene posted a joke on Facebook recently when the government opened the restaurants and said, we must start serving communion every week so that we can also have the right to be open as a church and as lighthearted. But when we are providing our communities with something, and the church was organized for service, if we were providing our communities with an essential service, the churches would have remained lighthouses and would have remained open throughout the time of lockdown. And we really need to look at ways in which we can really change our churches or our approach to church so that our church do indeed become essential service points. I also then want to mention that at church, we join each other for three very essential parts of the Christian experience. That is worship, fellowship, and witnessing. And something that's really interesting is that this pandemic has shown, as the church, gives you the platform to worship together. It gives you the platform to fellowship together. It gives you the platform to witness together. And so it's easier to witness because you are going with fellow believers. But the sad reality is that many members come to church and they just sit in the pew and they literally don't do anything. They come in, they sit, and the church service go by. And if there's one thing that this pandemic really has done, it has really forced us to become worshippers ourselves, because each one was now responsible basically for his own worship life. And we agitate, by the way, as Adventists, that worship is not just what we come do at church in the morning. It is it's a whole experience, and it's a lifestyle. You know, fellowship was interrupted. You know, and witnessing. You know, we hardly witness. We call ourselves witnesses, but we hardly you know, tell people about Jesus. And now what this pandemic has done in terms of isolating us, it has really forced us to become personal with Jesus. And I'll maybe reserve some comments for later as well, but really the one of all the negative things that this pandemic has done, the one positive for me that has come out of it is that it has really made me realize that church and my religious experience is a personal one with Jesus, in which I am now standing in the need of prayer. I need to worship. I need to somehow have fellowship. I need to go out there and be a witness.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think for me, what this pandemic has done has really going back to thinking, what is the Sabbath? I think for a long time, we have held on to a church building as a Sabbath, but now it was taken away. Then you had to start understanding what does Sabbath mean, because you could easily just chill at home, sleep. It became like any other day of the week because you had been at home the whole week. So I had to go back to understand what is the Sabbath, and I got to experience it differently. You know, studying for my own and just going out in nature. However, I did miss church a lot. You don't understand the value of just hugging somebody and having potluck with somebody and laughing with somebody. And as Pastor Grant mentioned, just doing ministry with, you know, with people and just hearing people's views. You actually miss that and the value that it has on your own spiritual life. But I also have appreciated being able to church hop. Being able to be exposed to people from all over the world. I'm quite a socialite, so I've made a lot of friends all over the world, just attending churches, attending Bible studies, you know, with other young people. But I think that the future church post-COVID has to be a church that can accommodate all these different ways of worship, because the reality is that many people are comfortable online, while some want to go back to church. So we should be able to continue with our live streams and still open church. And the idea of now a church being a church building, Sabbath being a church building, is now taken away. If you want to go into nature, don't judge us anymore. I know people who judge us if you want to go into nature, you're not going to church. If I want to spend the whole day with you at church, that's no longer how things are going to work. So I think post-COVID, like Eleanor said, a hybrid method, and we'll be challenged as people, you know. But also in this time, we have to think of those who don't have. I think many of us have been in a privileged position. I know friends of mine who are currently going out every Sabbath to Delft to go do open worship, you know, because those people in Delft don't have the money to go online, and in many other communities as well. So many people don't have the opportunity that we've had to kind of go with the online worship. Some have lost, you know, their faith in the process because, you know, they don't have the means. Some have felt secluded as well because, you know, it's like only the privileged of the church can attend online. And I think maybe churches also have not figured ways of how do they support their church members who don't have access to the internet. So that's a challenge for us as church members. How do we support our church members who don't have access to Wi-Fi? Do we all create a house, you know, in the community where everyone can go meet for live stream? All those ideas. Yeah, thank you.
It's me. Okay. Yeah. So I love what I hear. I think you've all said what I really wanted to say. These platforms have no doubt, you know, have been a great experience in so many levels, and I'm very proud of it. Of the Cape Conference that have, you know, immediately when we went into lockdown and we went into the situation that we find ourselves in, they were one of the conferences in the forefront with technology. So I take my hat for the good work that they have done, and we are privileged to be part of this conference. But to be honest, I miss that lady with that big hat that always sits in front of me. I don't know if you, but and that brother that says amen the whole time before I even make my point. I miss that. I miss the laughter. I miss the handshakes. You know, I'm for those of you who know me, I like a joke or two, you know, and I can take a joke or two, but I miss just the laughter and the smiles, and I don't really get that over technology because we come across very serious. I don't know if things will ever go back to normal. I know it's been said, that this has become our new normal, but what does that mean? But what I know for sure is that we cannot continue having worship in our bedrooms or in our beds or under blankets or in our little corners. It just cannot be, because church is more than just transferring information. It's about being a blessing to others. And let me just make an example. Natasha, I went to church today. So every second week, I go to church, and the other week I do online streaming for the churches that are not able to go to church. And on my way, I was just coming from church, right? I'm driving 60 because I'm a faithful pastor. So I'm driving at the speed limit that I'm supposed to drive. And I'm driving past a sister in need. So the sister didn't go to church. I went to church. Nothing wrong not going to church, but then I saw the sister, she's in need. I stopped the vehicle, I got out, and she was just, in despair. She needed me to pray for her. And I thought, you know what, if I was at home being blessed with all these platforms, I would not have had this opportunity to be a blessing to her. And then I drive further and I come to Okavango, close to where I stay. And there's a brother. I saw the tie and the suit, and it's 2 o'clock already because I had a long prayer with that dear sister. Shame. And then I say to the brother, in my mind, I'm saying I need to go for the 2:30 meeting because I need to be here for this meeting. The brother says I need to go back to Mitchell's Plain because he's stuck. The whole water, everything fell out at the bottom. I don't know what it is, exhaust. I'm not good with those things. But something happened and the water was just falling out. And I'm thinking to myself, do I help this brother? I have an appointment at 2:30. I need to be there for this appointment. So he asked, please. I said, okay, no, good, because I'm a pastor and he knows that I'm a pastor. So I'm thinking, okay, and I can't run away from that. It was different if I was maybe a brother, but I'm a pastor, so I don't know who listens to it. So I turned the car, went up Okavango, came down, drove at a decent pace back home. But all I'm saying is this. This is what church is about. It's to be a blessing. Now, not necessarily to your own folk, but a blessing to others. I mean, we had open airs, we had all these things, which I believe can still be there. So I'm not looking post-COVID. I'm looking at right now, things that we can do right now while we have the opportunity. Pastor Grant said it correctly. We need to be the church. We are the church. We need to take initiative. We need to have our own personal ministries. Personal ministries in the past was a 1 minute. Personal ministries in the past was compartmentalized, just placed in a certain box. But now we need to take it personally upon ourselves to be a blessing to others. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, my uncle. So when lockdown came, yes.
Brittany, sorry, just before you make your comment,
Awesome,
I would just like to remind our viewers on the live stream, this afternoon we are speaking about and we are having an introductory conversation to the topic, Rediscovering Church Post-Covid19. And so this introductory conversation we're having here is just for us as leaders, as churches, as church communities to get the juices flowing, to get the conversation started on how are we not just banding together as communities and as families, despite the trauma we've been through and are still going through, what is happening with our church is the question. How are we worshiping? How are we connecting with one another? As Pastor Eugene said, according to some of the comments on our live stream, how are we connecting to Christ and having personal relationships now that the church is not the way it used to be? Brittany, if you can continue with your comments. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Natasha. I think this is a very important topic. I think that it allows us to think, to really think about what's still to come. Something I picked up during the lockdown was how slowly but surely one spirituality was declining because we weren't evangelizing. I think that was, or we didn't have like evangelism the way we knew it to be at church, right? And if we know the sanctuary message and all, the holy place has, it has the Bible study, it has the prayer, and then it has evangelism. And that is a triangle of sanctifications. And so that is what we should be doing all the time in order to keep on walking the spiritual walk. But now lockdown happens, and so, you know, like Pastor Eugene mentioned, the fact that we had to now be inside of our homes and not go out and do evangelism and become involved and be a blessing to others, we were basically starting to only feed ourselves, you know. And if you're sitting inside and just eating and eating and eating, eventually, you know, you're going to gain a little bit, and that then transfers over into obesity and heart problems and all of these things, you know. So that's the physical way of how life works. So if we look at the spiritual way, we were just now gaining a whole lot of information, you know, via these platforms, but we weren't able to fully exercise what we were learning. And I think for me personally, you know, everyone was going on about introverts are so excited that we get to be at home and all of that. And I'm not an introvert, I'm an extrovert. So when this happened, I was like, okay, I think I can do 3 weeks. And then we were announced, oh no, there's levels. And then we were like, we saw how long these levels were, and it was just becoming more and more depressing. And then we have a study, like for example, on the lesson study that took place for this past week was on depression. And then we wonder why so many of the depression rates are going higher and higher. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that people are actually stuck at home, you know, in their home spaces, not going out, enjoying sunlight, but not just the sunlight aspect, in socializing with other people as well. So I definitely missed that evangelism aspect of church. And as soon as church opened for us, we made a point as a youth to go out into the community. We had gloves on, masks on, but we went and we said a prayer with people. And so many of the church people at Mount Calvary were like, oh, we need to do this more often. It was amazing, you know. And you could just see how evangelism is definitely important in the spiritual growth of a Christian.
Hi again, everybody. So I think no one can argue with the fact that this pandemic has caused all of us to ask questions about what church really is. And at Helderberg Church, we'd had the privilege or the timing to actually start asking that question a couple of years before the pandemic hit. We were in a situation where we were slowly losing members. The most contentious issues being discussed were the color of the curtains and the carpets, etc. You know, the whole typical caricature of a church that has suddenly become so inward focused and really lost its vision. And so as a small group of leaders, we got together and asked the question, well, what is our purpose? And we resonated with some of the things other people have said. You know, if church were to disappear, would the community even notice? And so we decided, and we're led through lots of prayer to see church as a means of connection. Firstly, to connect people with God by providing a platform and a gathering point to worship. So to connect people with God through worship, that was one of the functions of the church. The other function of the church was to act as the body of Christ and to connect people to each other. And then the third and very important purpose for church is to provide a platform for people to connect into the community and make a difference. And so we'd started on that journey a little while before the pandemic. And so when the pandemic hit, we were at first thrown and said, well, we're all about connection. You know, this is how are we going to continue to live out our purpose when we're not able to connect anymore face to face? But we quickly realized that connection isn't only about seeing people face to face. Connection is something very deep. It's something that we do with God, even though we can't see God face to face. And so we sort of got to the place where we realized that the pandemic isn't an interruption, but it's a disruption to society. It's not something that briefly interrupts the way we live, and once it's over, we'll go back to normal again. It has disrupted every sphere of our society, and we've seen the impact. And I think the financial impact, especially, will have a long tail. We still are going to see the worst impact of this pandemic in the years to come. So we reorientated our understanding of our purpose for connection. And we implemented online church and a lot of things which the church board and established subcommittees to do e-church, etc., had taken years and never really done anything. We got done in a week or two because we had to. We have a very interactive church experience, having a Zoom where people are able to ask questions, to interact after the sermon, ask the pastor questions, etc. So that's one area that we are doing church differently. But the key thing that I just wanted to share, and maybe it'll spark ideas for other people, is that the connection into our community is critical. And we looked out into our community and said, well, what are the areas that the pandemic has impacted? We'd already established relationships with our local hospital, with a foster care organization, with a child abuse center, and we turned our resources to assist those institutions in the pandemic. For example, at the hospital, we are paying for, we bought a cell phone and data and airtime, and we have volunteers who take that phone into the COVID wards where people who aren't able to see their family members and often need to say goodbye because that's how dangerous this disease is, are able to say their last goodbyes on the phone. We're providing psychological counseling services. We're paying for professionals to counsel the medical staff and some of the patients as a way of connecting into our community. So it's really an opportunity to do more as church than just to meet together once a week and worship.
Hi, everyone. You know, there's something about speaking after everyone else. So there's one way to look at it. You know, a lot of what I want to say has been said, but actually I see it as confirmation because we didn't talk about what exactly each one was going to say, you know. But I have been impressed over the past week that we are the church, you and I. We are the church. So in our attempts to rediscover the church, we have to remember that we're going to have to rediscover ourselves and each other too. Because we're living in a time of global trauma, loss, grief, and disappointment, disagreement, argument, and way too many goodbyes. And it's almost like it was on a scale that we didn't anticipate. So a couple of weeks ago, I was online on an online study of the lesson, and it hit me, you know, studying about forgiveness, studying about facing our fears, rest for the depressed. It's such an opportunity for us at this time in Earth's history, because now we have the opportunity to live it. The church needs our light. The community needs our light now more than ever before. Leading the way with forgiveness, compassion, and just plain caring. We need to learn how to love ourselves and each other again. I think that this breaks through the walls of the church building and supersedes the bandwidth of the Zoom service. I believe that a post-COVID, if there is such a thing, a rediscovered church needs to establish itself as a community resource for healing, all kinds of healing. We're going to need it till Jesus comes. Thanks.
Can everybody hear me? That has just become one of the, I know everyone can hear me. I was just doing what everybody does every week, you know, just to make sure that people can hear. Everybody said everything, so they said be original, and this is one of the things that I thought of. We had to close this chasm of technology in a very short time. At North Pine, we saw an emergence of leadership in people that we never expected, and the age group of people. Prof. Links did mention, you know, the younger generation, and whether by default or by design, are leading the tech advancement at the various churches. And by God's grace, they have shown foresight and drive to get the church going. And North Pine, within the second or third week of the pandemic, started a Sabbath school to bring the church together. But in order for this to have happened, the success was basically due to the fact that North Pine was already connected. They were already connected on a WhatsApp group. So as a church, the interaction, the potlucks, the fellowship, the birthday wishes, the acknowledgements of members' celebrations and challenges was already happening. And I think that is the key to understanding what is the church. Is it only a one day a week experience, or is it a part of our everyday lifestyle? And we've come to realize that if it becomes part of your lifestyle, it is definitely going to permeate through all aspects of one's experience. And so the worship experience is not limited only to a Sabbath. It is opened up a whole new avenue of exposure to Wednesday evening prayer meetings. I know at the bigger churches we've been struggling to have even the smaller groups meeting on a Wednesday evening, but right now that's a positive. Yes, Pastor Eugene, albeit in our slippers and our gowns behind the cameras and the profile pictures, the fact is that we are engaging and we are inviting. We've also reached across regions. So we've got people from Gauteng to KwaZulu-Natal, some we've had ministers from Northern America, etc., joining the church and ministering to us as well as joining our services. And so this has shown us as a church, we don't only have to focus on our region, we can expand. And I think for the future, this has forced us to think like businesses. No one expected the way the church or the world will have to contend with COVID-19, not even the corporate community. But there are plans in place. We also have to plan for the end that is yet to come. We've been given a mandate that it is coming. And how are we preparing ourselves adequately as a church for that end?
Thanks so much, Stafford. So we have now heard everyone's first comments and first thoughts, and we'd like to continue inviting those watching us on the Facebook live stream to comment. Tell us what the issues are that you're facing as churches. Tell us what is it that we all think, could we think more about and improve on, since we now have become more accustomed to technology, different times of day, different types of programs, different types of content, and even different types of people. Maybe people that we haven't seen active in church before are active now, and vice versa. And so before we just continue with some more comments, I just like to ask Glenn if you can comment next, and then pass to Eugene, and we will continue then from there with Uncle Alti and so forth. If we can also just maybe comment a little bit more on where do you think we are going, and what do we need to think more about as church members, especially when it comes to the corporate congregating or just the corporate aspect of the moving church and how it functions together. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Natasha. I think for me, and I see it both in my professional life, working at UCT, as well as for the church, that the hybrid future is the only real pragmatic future. We're going to have to be dual speed, online, in person where we can, but also taking advantage of every digital channel that we can. And I'm hopeful that, as a number of people have mentioned already, the conference has pivoted well, but I think the conference also needs a strategic realignment to focus resources to supplying platforms, shared platforms for churches, digital channels that can make things easier for especially those churches that are under-resourced. And I think that's one thing the pandemic has shown. It's cracked open the fault lines in our society in a big way. We know there are many divisions, especially in South African society, and I think the divisions between those who are rich and poor, those who are literate and illiterate, etc., are wider than ever, and we need to work together like we never have before to meet those needs, to reallocate resources from resource-rich areas to areas that desperately need them. And we also know that we don't even know what all the needs are. So I think that's also really important, is for us to take the effort and be proactive and go out and look for needs in our fellow churches and in our communities of where we can make a difference. But I think as the Chinese always say, don't let a good crisis go to waste. And I think this has been an opportunity that God has really used to just wake us up. And I think it's another sign for me that the end is coming soon. And it's been a time of tragedy and loss. We've lost loved ones, we've lost jobs, we've lost our sense of security in the world. And so I think one thing the church has to recognize as we meet is to give space for that grieving process, for that mourning, to acknowledge the loss, and not just, a lot of us are very tempted to, okay, here's a new direction, here's a new opportunity, let's rush and put in new programs in place. But I think it's also taught me that we need to slow down and acknowledge where we are as followers of Jesus and as a church community, and recognize that loss, but also recognize that as followers of Jesus, he contains suffering in himself. And if we are the body of Christ, we need to do the same. We need to absorb that suffering and embrace it and follow Christ where he will lead us.
Yes, yeah. Look, I think post-COVID is very far, to think post-COVID and moving away from COVID. It's a very distant idea. So our post-COVID should be now. We should actually, if you get what I'm trying to say, we should actually find ways how we can be more effective now. Now, going back to church, and since we are dealing with the church, I think, I also what Glenn was saying and Lisa was that we need to create an atmosphere of healing. There are so many people that have lost loved ones, not just loved ones, economy, all these things. And there needs to be a restoration, a period where the church allows the people to restore. As a minister in the gospel, I can truly tell you that this COVID pandemic has opened my eyes, because I'm not going to go to church and preach the same sermons that I used to preach. There's obviously things that we used to talk about became irrelevant during COVID. And I think we need to draw a line with what is relevant and what is irrelevant. There used to be messages that and arguments we had about, like Glenn was saying, about the curtain is red or should the curtain be blue. Those are things are irrelevant. Why are we arguing about these things? There were also things like dress, and we pick on dress, but really, to be honest, we all have been having church in our pajamas. So there are things that, we shouldn't focus on, that really won't spoil our church. Trivial things, we should put it aside and open the church for a place of healing and restoration. Allow the church to grow, allow the people to grow spiritually instead of religiously. Everyone's watching the divine hour their own time. And when we go to church, we must have an open mind, especially for our young people. And because I think what we have done, and I might fall in the same trap, we have gone to church because it's been religious, for religious purposes, but we haven't been spiritually transformed. And so we focus on our elders, our leaders, our pastors, our focus, hammering on, even us, hammering on things that really doesn't matter. Because I did live streaming, Natasha, and I couldn't preach about dress. I couldn't preach about, because that's irrelevant. You understand what I'm saying? So relevancy becomes, and we must take this whole thing that we've done here and we take it to church and we become relevant and deal with relevant issues that pertains to personal spiritual growth.
Thanks so much, Pastor Eugene. I think that was a very relevant thing to say as well in the context of this conversation. And so before Uncle Alti continues with his comment, I just want to highlight just some of the comments from our live stream. We have a few pastors also commenting here as well, which I think is very encouraging, because while, as Pastor Eugene said, we might not now look to them for a certain type of nurturing as we did before, these leaders are still in place for a certain function, I think, in our corporate spaces and corporate church communities. They are also there to effect change and to really listen to the outcry and the influence of especially the young, I think, we have in our church. Someone also mentioned something here about the place of group ministries or group home ministries, having small home churches, which can, I think, probably be contentious because we are still trying to be very safe. We are still trying to be as responsible citizens, I think, as we can. So we just need to be careful of that. Someone also mentioned something about the youth being underutilized. Now that we have experienced what technology can do, this really presents an opportunity for youth and young people to run forward in leadership in our churches. Someone also mentioned something here about, you know, really what it means to be a church, a traditional church community, and have that traditional setup. We shouldn't just discard it completely or take it away, because it still has a place in our spiritual experience. And I know that some of us here on the panel have alluded to this ideal concept of the hybrid model, which is maybe something we can deal with again in another conversation. But thank you so much for all that is watching our live stream and for your comments. We will now continue. So Alda Alti, if you can once again give us another take on this topic. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I think our time is fast spent, but I'm going to be short. And you know, the word that is banned from public is shock. The president has been told he cannot use the word shock again. I just want to say that I think our Lord Jesus Christ, looking at the church over the last 100 years or 200 years, perhaps the last 100 years more so, has really come to a point where he says, this Laodicean church of mine needs to be shocked. And he allowed this shock. And this shock really gave us a serious wake-up call, as many have said. And with that comes a lot of rethink. For instance, as we've all said, that the young people came forward and actually took the hand of the older folk leading as elders and deacons. And from that perspective, I think this type of forum and this type of discussion gives the opportunity for everyone to contribute. And I wonder whether our conference leaders, our union leaders, our division leaders, and the world church has thought of how are we going to arrest the church in terms of structure. Are we going to have multi-pronged approaches to this? Are we going to have, you know, the old, what do they call it? The guidance in the little book that we have, the fact that, what do we call that, Stafford?
The church manual?
The church manual. Are they going to structure the church manual to fit the needs, Eugene? Because, as I've said earlier on, I mean, there are some posts that just did not function now. You can even look at the revisit of what Glenn has said, what you have said, and many others have said, in terms of, you know, the mission of the church that has quite a number of departments that can be constructed in a way that they support each other in one unit. Now, all of that restructuring has to take place. So I would just say that, you know, the Sabbath was is our worship time, but the COVID has brought the entire, we're not Seventh-day Adventists anymore. We now 7 days. You are still, you're a 7 days, huh? It's a 7-day Adventist. So I think the focus must be on sharing our truth, sharing our light with those. And let me speak to the elder folk that also gave their comments. You know, the rituals still have a role to play in our church. Communion is such a ritual. How do we accommodate that? How do we make place for other rituals that we have? Sabbath school can have a totally refocus on its approach, you know, where we have just 3 or 4 minutes of conversing with the community. That would be the way. But I see my time is up. I just want to say multi-pronged is my approach.
I absolutely agree with you, Brother Alti. I think a multi-pronged approach is the way to go. A hybrid approach is the way to go. Things have been irrevocably changed. I know people are hankering to go back to how it used to be. There is no going back to that. This is how it is, and we don't even know how it's going to change. And I think the best thing that we can do is to adapt to the best of our abilities. 2 weeks ago, we had communion service, and it was a virtual service, and it was my first virtual service. And I was absolutely blessed. There was a spirit of reverence in our home. I felt so privileged to be able to do it, and I felt very moved by it. And for me, I think one of the things that really struck me was I felt a sense of connection to the church, but also I had that personal experience at home, and I was thinking about how we can adapt many of those things that we hold dear. And I think, my parents, they have gone to church the minute that those doors opened. They went back. As much as I was anxious and being like, okay, guys, can you, so I think that the in-person services should remain, especially for those who really find a blessing in it. But we should keep our virtual platforms. These exist, and they are now there for our benefit and for us to use and to exploit to the best of our abilities. I think about, that the Bible has given us guidelines. And if I have to think about what I've been blessed by the most, not so much the in-person, but what happens in between through the members and the bodies, the different pieces of this church body, the reaching out, the praying for me, the praying with others and praying for others. The Bible gives us as a church community and believers guidelines on how to relate to each other and to lift each other up by loving one another. 1 John 4 verse 11, through fellowship, Hebrews 10, 24 and 25, encouraging one another, 1 Corinthians 14, 26, and praying for one another. And I think that these are guidelines that we should hold on to as we navigate this together and as we lean on the collective wisdom that we have.
Now, I can certainly agree with everyone and affirm that the hybrid model that we've been speaking need to continue. I remember when I was a student, I was living with a family from the Kuils River Church, and when they would leave home, just to use this example, they would leave home between 5 and 6 in the mornings, and they would come back 6 to 7, and closer to 7 than to 6. Now, you take something like prayer meeting, for example. There was no possible way how they could attend prayer meeting, being out on the road. Cape Town is a big city. And I think, since we have, when I used to stay with them, sometimes, very rarely, the wife would come home early on a Wednesday afternoon, and she would be so excited to go to prayer meeting with me. And now this pandemic is here, and we have been given the online platform, and they are in prayer meeting every single week now, an opportunity which they could not enjoy before this. However, at the same time, I need to say that while the online platforms are good, we also need to be intentional about catering to the needs to those who are left behind in technology, because they are still the majority of the church who have been left behind. And I know some people are very smart and educated and say, no, everybody should have internet by now. No, people are poor. Not everybody can have access. And so the church needs to provide that space for those who really don't have internet and who cannot make the connection with those on the online world. And by the way, I have to mention this before my time is up. Both worship, fellowship, and witnessing, which is the mission of the church, the purpose of the church, will be attacked in the last days, or are central features of the last days. If we look at the three angels' message, the war revolves around worship. Who do you worship? Will you worship God, or will you worship the beast and its image? If we look at fellowship, Hebrews says, do not neglect the assembling of yourselves together, all the more as you see the day dawning. Even witnessing, the end will not come until this gospel is preached as a witness. And so we have to have platforms in which the church can still successfully worship, successfully fellowship, successfully witness, because I believe, and Eleanor just mentioned earlier, that she didn't know, how can this gospel be preached? And believe it or not, there's so many unreached areas still. But if there's anything this pandemic has shown us, is how quickly the gospel can spread into those, via these virtual platforms. But I also ask myself, how will every single person, because Jesus won't come until every single person knows or has heard. How will they hear? And then it dawned on me, everybody in the world knows about COVID. Why? Because COVID has really become the main topic of it's on the news. And so I believe as this drama of the ages, as the great controversy unfolds, God's people and their allegiance to his law and the Sabbath, they will be almost forced and pushed to the center, because it will be, and I'm not a prophet, I don't know exactly how it's going to happen, but it will be the same, it will be the talk of the time. Everybody will know, everybody will realize what is currently happening in the world. And so I do think we have to be intentional, because going towards the end, those of us who are privileged to have internet and these facilities now, this is going to be taken away from us still too. And so then we can't be, so I agree with the comment there that says, we need to be having small groups and so forth, so that our people, when the time of the end comes, they don't depend on the pastor or on the church. They are able to worship, fellowship, and witness in their own right as believers and as children of God.
So I think it's my turn now. I would say that Christ met people at their point of need. Whether you were, part of the, bigger elite of government, in the times, or whether you were, part of the outcasts, like Levi, who was, a tax collector, Christ went and met him at his point of need. And I think that's how the new church should function. We've been challenged by COVID to really just meet people where they are. So even how we worship, whether you are somebody who wants the online experience, because I think I read a friend of mine shared a comment that I shared on Facebook about how we need to stop. The truth is no longer black and white. We shouldn't force people to be, I'm part of this group, I'm part of that group, I'm pro this, I'm against this. It's not as clear as that. Even if you are pro-internet, it does not make you less of a Christian. Even if you're pro going into church, it does not make you less of a Christian. So the church now also can't be, we are pro-internet, we are pro that, but the church should be, okay, fine. How do we meet our members where they are? And how do you move with the world? Because the world is moving and we want to give people, a place where they can experience Jesus Christ where they are. So I think at church, post-COVID or even now, the church that just moves with where the world is and with where the church members are at. Thank you.
It was mentioned earlier, that elders still have a really big role to play. And I think that together as a church, both youth and elders, this is a time for us to work together, and not to be divided and to say, okay, only the youth are going to take over from here on out. No, I think that it is a very important part for us to involve the elders as well. For example, when we started at Mount Calvary with virtual programs and all of that, we were advised by our elders to communicate. And even prior to that happening, we initiated and we said, you know what, even though as a youth department, we want to initiate programs and do things for the church, we do still need to speak to our board, speak to our elders, because as much as virtual church has become a reality and the procedures and things like that, some of it are quite irrelevant. There are still principles that I believe we still need to be following. And that is just mere respect for those who are in charge. And so I think it's very important for us as youth to, yes, initiate, go ahead and get excited and do something for your church to enhance the programs of your church and so on. And as youth, we should be initiating and doing that. I fully believe that and I'm fully behind it. I do that myself. But I think it's also very important for us to still remember that there are rules that still need to be abided by. I think something that was picked up during the pandemic that caused a bit of a rift in our church was, or not our church, but in other churches, was miscommunication. So some youth programs would invite certain speakers that weren't communicated perhaps to their elders, and that I don't think is how God would term moving with the times. I think that there's still a procedure that needs to take place, and I think what the world church at large needs to do is re-establish, rediscover what those procedures should look like so that we don't have any division moving forward post-COVID-19. Thank you.
So I really miss singing in church. I really miss it. Congregational singing for me is like the great equalizer. You know, when we get moved by the message in the song and it gets sung it full of force, you know, whether you can sing or not is not even the issue, you know. And so one of the greatest fears that I've had to face in this time is that we may never get to sing like that again. And that's not a lekker thought, you know. On the other hand, it's not lekker to sing with a mask on. Let's just be honest. We're doing it because we are observing protocol, you know, but it's not lekker. And it just slaps differently if there's only like 50 people in church, you know. And I've listened to many live streams. And even if the praise and worship team is mixed to perfection, there's still not enough congregation in it for me. So I was always left still, you know, yearning for that experience that we used to have. So one Saturday late afternoon, I don't know if it was out of defiance or desperation, I sat down at the piano and I recorded all 4 verses. I played all 4 verses of Savior, Breathe and Evening Blessing. That's a favorite Sabbath closing hymn at our church. And then I sang all 4 verses. And in my way of congregational singing, the one verse I sing the melody and the next verse my tenor and octave higher, like lala. And so really enjoying myself and recorded in just one take, not fancy, not special, but a captured moment in time, if you will. And I sent it to some of the church members. And I captioned it, Sabbath closing for one. And one of the responses I got from a church friend was that she is so incredibly sad at the thought that we may not get to sing like this again. And I realized that we're going to have to find new ways. And one of the ways could possibly be for us to sit down and answer the question, what is the purpose of congregational singing? And then musicians and members align ourselves towards that purpose. And so I have to end with acknowledging, respect, and encouraging the musicians who are already trying out new methods of ministry. Because for me, a rediscovered church places music as a ministry and not as a sideshow. Thanks.
Yeah, one of the things that you just can't do is like the welcome greetings, the God is good, and you're waiting for that response. You see lips moving. It just doesn't have the same impact. Oh, I miss that. I'm reminded that, you know, everybody has really covered a number of important points, and I think I can only add to it by saying, yes, Jesus ministered to the needs. Each society he visited, he knew the need because he was on the ground with them. Each culture, he understood the effective means of ministry. Each individual he could speak to at their level. He would even ask the sick, what is it that you want me to do for you? Instead of assuming what needs they have. It's important for us moving forward, and I've heard a lot of the terms that have been used. I've heard customization of the church, I've heard hybrid, you know, I've heard of adaptability, systems thinking. I've even heard about mental health conditions, shut-ins. There is a lot that we have available to us, and I think each church can get something out of thinking differently. Yes, we can encourage our leadership to consider a different model, but ultimately, I've come to discover I am the church. It starts with me. What am I doing? How can I minister to the needs of someone close to me? How can I get to know someone close to me? And it starts from there. And exponentially, the changes can take place. if we remain close to the cross, I do believe that God is working. We need to be available, and we need to be able to follow his prompting. So with all of these things, all the plans that we can put in place for a different way of worship, a different way of church, a different way of engaging communion, whether it's virtual or in person, ministering to the shut-ins in person or virtual. I think at the foundation of all of this, we need to remember that there is a specific need for a certain person and a certain household and a certain circumstance. Gone are the days where we are putting a blanket over everything and saying everybody's covered by a tradition. We have to minister to that need specifically in order for it to be effective. And so I believe that if we bear that in mind, as our characters differ and our faces differ, so our ministries can differ. But it starts with that sincere relationship with Christ, and it will emanate. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto us.
Thank you so much, Stafford, and thank you for everyone else for your insightful comments from your point or perspective of experience. And I think this is the reason why this panel was put together and these panelists were selected, because I think each of us that have been on the live stream this afternoon could find somebody here to relate to. And so I think for this conversation, this introductory conversation this afternoon, which for me has been so fruitful, I've been able to connect to some of what has been said, but new things have also, I think, developed here that has been brought across. And so this conversation has really taken place with the idea to motivate us as church members, as a church community, as leaders, as pastors, maybe. And I think for myself, I'll admit that maybe here are some things that were said that I haven't thought of. And so I think we really all have to be honest from our point of reference. How are we rediscovering ourselves and how are we rediscovering our church? And so as we wrap up this conversation this afternoon, I would just like to give maybe a few minutes, if there is each one of our panelists that would just maybe like to make a closing remark, just in 10 seconds, just one thing that you would like to leave, if it is with, you know, our pastors, our leaders, if it is with our lay or church members, if there's just one piece of something that you just like to leave as your closing remark, I'll give you an opportunity now. Uncle Altie?
I would think that, you know, this initiative is the first of many. I'd like to think that we've just ignited thought, thinking. Stafford spoke of strategy and how we actually should plan a little bit better, because this thing just fell into our midst and we now have to really sort it out. And this is where I would think that the bottoms-up approach that we have, bottom-up approach, is demonstrated through this discussion. And I'd like the leadership at the conference and at the union and general conference to give us some directive, because you know, otherwise we would all be walking in different directions to a point where we are actually confused.
The last comment that I'd like to leave and share with everyone, I think for me it's just an encouragement for people to reach out, whether you need prayer or whether you can offer prayer. I think, you know, this time that we are connected virtually, it makes us feel like we're connected, but many of us feel like we are disconnected, and many might be on the periphery and we can't reach them. So my word of encouragement is, if you need someone, reach out. And if you know that there's someone that is needing, please be that hand that reaches out.
Comment that I would like to make is, those who are worshiping from home, stop stressing about us who are going to church. And those who are going to church, stop stressing about those who don't want to come to church. We'll meet each other in heaven and we'll sing songs together.
I mean, I think for me, let's all have an open mind. An open mind is the best thing to take us forward. Let's not hold on to our thoughts from the past.
My last remark is just to encourage the youth. We are told in Spirit of Prophecy that it's the youth who's going to close and finish this work for us. And let us take our elders' advice seriously when they give it to us. Do not become offended. They are there to help us. The rules that are put in place at our church are there as a safety net. But at the end of the day, let's get fired up to do what God has called us to do as young people.
Awesome stuff, Brittany. I would just like to say thank you. Thank you to all the people who have tried something in this time. I think they've been met with a lot of criticism and a lot of critique, and a lot of you should have done this and that and the other. And I just feel thankful, you know, because we have people who are trying, and let's support them.
And I would like to echo the sentiments. Let's connect the disconnected. Let's continue to be inclusive in our communication and decision-making. And to the youth, of which I'm still a part, Brittany, speak up, shout, let us hear what needs to be done, and force us to listen so that we can move with the church together toward the kingdom.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your comments, your time. I have mentioned before our live stream and on the poster advertising that this was an introduction conversation, but that we are also all really thought leaders. And I think for those of us that have not rediscovered yet, have not even begun thinking maybe about a rediscovered church community, a rediscovered spiritual self, I think now is an opportunity for all of us to really think and to pray about this, because at the end of the day, this is God's church. We are a movement. We are not standing still. And things are going to change whether we like it or not, because God is coming. And so I'd like to encourage all of us, where you are, church members, family, friends, where you find yourselves this afternoon, be encouraged. Know that even though this church may seem as it is about to fall, it won't, because God is still on the throne. And so once again, this afternoon, panelists, thank you so much for your comments, for your time, for the comments also on our live stream. Thank you so much to our viewers that's joined us this afternoon in this conversation. And so let us see to the future how else we can maybe create some more conversations similar to this that maybe go in more depth. Maybe we can think of better collaborative training if it needs to come to that, and see how we can move forward. Thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Sabbath and the new coming week. God bless. Can we all close our eyes for a word of prayer? Dear Father God, thank you so much for this conversation, for these panelists, for the viewers out there on our live stream. We would like to bring them also especially before you, as we have all engaged in this very pertinent and important topic of your church, the corporate state, the church body. This is your bride, Father. Lord, we want to humble ourselves. We want to ask your forgiveness, but at the same time, we look forward to what is new, what is different, what is the next level. May you help us all in this regard as church members, as church leaders, as pastors, as this functioning body, to know what step to take next. We ask, God, that you may continue to lead as we follow. This is our prayer in the name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you so much once again for joining us. Have a good week further. Keep well.